If we could begin, your background in history has been the Reformation, that great split between the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestants a little over 500 years ago that reshaped Western Europe and has so shaped the world since. And yet you've written a book here that dissects our present age. I think it'd be useful just to explore briefly, because so many people now decry the value of history or want to rewrite it to suit various other purposes, various agendas. How does history, as opposed to, say, sociology, political science, philosophy, psychology, give us a unique understanding of where we're at, of the present?
Yeah, it's a great question, John. I think part of the answer is, of course, that we are all historical beings. We exist in particular places in time, and we are profoundly shaped by the world into which we're born, which is the product itself of history. So the way that a 21st century Australian thinks is different, for example, to the way that a 4th century BC Athenian would think. Question is why? The same basic biology binds us all together, but why the difference between ancient Athens and modern day Australia? Well, the answer is in large part historical, studying the historical processes that have led to the production of Australia, led to the way in which modern Australians think. So part of the answer to that, I think, is we're all historical beings. And secondly, related to that, one of the things that I think we can all tend to do is absolutize our own age. We can tend to think that the way we think about the world is the way the world must be thought about. What historians do is relativize that. What historians do is they ask the question, why are these particular people thinking in this particular way, in this particular place, at this particular point in time? And again, I think history helps us answer that. One could, for example, you mentioned philosophy, psychology, etc. One could approach the issues I look at in the book from a purely philosophical or psychological perspective. But then there's a question that would lie behind that, and that is, why these philosophies, why these psychological positions at this particular point in time? And that again would drive us back to the need to understand our history. What are the forces, the factors that have shaped the way we think in our particular point in time?
And as you were writing this, it struck me that, during the Reformation, that period of history that you've studied so much, there was a lot of what we'd perhaps recognise today as the toppling of statues and of icons. There were heated battles over ideas in universities and in the wider society at large. It was not either an age known for toleration of different views or of even freedom of speech or of conscience. I'm wondering whether, as you wrote this, you saw some similarities with some of the trends that we're seeing today in what amounts to a massive shift in the way people think and perceive themselves and those around them.
Yes, very much so. I think the thing that binds today together with the Reformation more than anything else is the fact that the Reformation was in large part the result of a revolution in information technology. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century fueled the social movements that ultimately became the Reformation. What you see in the 16th century is a dramatic reconfiguring of social relations, a dramatic reconfiguration of how power is understood and distributed within society, connected to this technological revolution of the printing press. Today, of course, much of what we see going on around us, much of the chaos, much of the flux and change is also tied to a revolution in information technology, the rise of the internet, the rise of social media. So there's a definite connection or parallel, I think, between the social upheavals of the 16th century and the social upheavals we're witnessing today. Where that parallel, I'm not sure if the parallel breaks down or merely becomes much more disturbing, is that the amount of information that the printing press was generating, that was creating this social disturbance, is minuscule compared to that which we now see today from the internet. It's the information we receive today must be 100-fold, 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold what was possible in the Reformation. And so if you think that we are seeing now that the kind of explosion of information that we saw in the Reformation, but maybe 100 or 1,000 times faster, that raises all kinds of questions. When you think the Reformation witnessed 100 years of bloodshed and chaos in Europe before things finally stabilized, what is our current revolution in information technology and social media? What is that bringing down the line for us? It's hard to tell at this point, but I think there is a warning from history there, most certainly.
Yes, it strikes me it's not only the reach and the multiplication of voices that the social media and so forth has given us. It's also the technology for invasive monitoring of people's individual lives that hands a power to not just a social movement, but also to an authoritarian government at the other level that has never been there before. And that's a new and terrifying element to my way of thinking, because it gives people the capacity for a level of control and based on monitoring of people's activities that's not been available to an authoritarian state or to anybody else in the past. So this is a technological revolution, as you say, in the mold of the printing press and what have you, but so much more widespread, further reaching.
Yes, I think that's a very astute point. I mean, there is a qualitative difference there, that what we are witnessing, one could put it this way, we're seeing the complete annihilation of the private sphere. Western society has always been predicated on the public sphere and the private sphere. And although the boundaries between them have often been permeable, by and large, we've been able to keep them separate. Now we're in a position where there is no private sphere. What you say on your Facebook account could cost you your job, could cost you your reputation. So I think that's a very astute comment. And again, that puts us into unprecedented territory. On the one hand, we know what media revolutions can look like because we can look back at the Reformation. But this kind of complete transformation of the private sphere or abolition of the private sphere, this is unprecedented. This is unprecedented and very disturbing.
So to come to the book and set up where we might go from here, the rise and triumph of the modern self, perhaps it would be useful if you were to give us a bit of a feeling for what you mean by the modern self, because you're plainly implying that it's a different self.
Yeah, I mean, there is a common sense way we all use the word self. I mean, I'm aware that I'm not John Anderson. You're aware you're not Carl Trueman. There's that kind of common sense understanding of what we might call our sphere of self-consciousness. And we use the term self in a common sense way like that. The way I'm using it in the book, though, is in a more technical kind of way. What I'm trying to get at with the notion of the modern self is, what is it that makes modern people tick? What is it that makes us feel that life is worthwhile? Where do we ground our identity? How do we understand happiness? And I use a contrast in the book between myself and my grandfather. My grandfather had what I would regard as a very boring job. He was a sheet metal worker in the industrial heartland of England in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. He spent his day on a production line doing the same thing day in, day out. Pretty sure that if I'd asked him, Granddad, do you get job satisfaction? He'd have said, sure, I get paid a fair day's wage for an honest day's work, and I'm able to put shoes on my children's feet, put bread on the table. I'm able to meet my commitments to other people, and that gives me great satisfaction. If you ask me the same question, my intuitive response is going to be, I get a real buzz out of standing in front of a class and teaching kids. I get a psychological buzz from what I do intrinsically. And the difference between myself and my grandfather, I would say, is the difference really between the modern self and that which precedes it. My grandfather's understanding of selfhood, in my sense, was outwardly directed. He was who he was because of his ability to meet his commitments to other people. For myself, it's a much more psychological thing. It's how I feel. It's what are the things I do? How do they make me feel in an immediate psychological way? So the modern self of the book's title is really a highly psychologized self that has come to regard personal happiness as an inner feeling of contentment and fulfillment as that psychological sense of well-being.
Almost a modern insistence then that you have a right to be happy, not a right just to pursue happiness. You have a right to be happy, and that plays into some of the other things I think we're going to talk about. If you're not happy, then someone must be to blame, but it couldn't be me.
Absolutely. And of course, if you understand happiness as primarily psychological, then anyone who's hurting your feelings is a hindrance to your happiness.
Seems it also has great implications for what might be called the Western economic system of capitalism as well. If once satisfaction was about doing a hard day's work and saving and building wealth for the sake of your family, that's a vastly different thing to pursuing wealth so that I can enjoy myself and be psychologically happy personally. And so it has major implications, I think, too, for what might loosely be called the efficiency and indeed the morality of capitalism.
Yes, I think so. When you look at the falling birth rates in the developed world at the moment, again, you see that sort of playing out, that children come to be seen as, well, they're the things that consume my wealth. They can stand in the way of me being happy because they involve emotional and financial commitments that, frankly, I might not want to make if I simply want to be my own person.
Thank you for watching this episode. We appreciate your support. If you value vital conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel there and also click the notification bell to stay up to date with new releases.